something like half of the students in universities today do not believe in freedom of speech, because you can't use your freedom of speech to spread hate. All right? This is their idea. Notice how they're taking the high moral ground. But of course, the whole idea of freedom of speech is to protect things that people don't like. You don't need protection for things that people like, because they're going to let it happen. It's when there are things that people don't like, maybe as some would characterize as hate, that we need to have the first freedoms in place, like in the Constitution, to guarantee that our views will be expressed. So two things going on here. You have a wildly relativistic group, okay? You do you, except when you hate. And then you cannot have the freedom to do that. We are going to interfere with your freedoms to do that, okay? So there's a contradiction there, relativism and objectivism. They're relativists when it suits them, and all of a sudden they're moral people. Hate is wrong. Yeah. But now they're using the word hate in this rhetoric to take away first freedoms, like speech. Yeah. Okay, but there's a third problem. Who gets to define hate? Yes. They get to do it. The people in power get to define what hate is, and hate is something other than their view.
What if it's actually hateful? Like what if you had like the KKK or something like that, who, or you know what I mean, like a radical position of people, or a radical group of people who are saying truly hateful things.
Well, individuals can renounce them. That would be one cultural response, or communities. But what you can't do is take away their first freedoms. You cannot say, we are going to stop you from speaking. And in fact, historically, they weren't stopped from speaking. Okay. Now, when they did violent acts that destroyed property and people, that's different. And that should be addressed. But, you know, there's a famous march. This is before your time. I grew up in Chicago, okay? And north of Chicago, the city boundary was Skokie, okay? And in Skokie, they had a bunch of real, genuine, actual white supremacist Nazis marching many years ago. This might have been in the 60s, all right? These were the true thing, not the news make me up, the CNN make me up of white supremacists that are coming out of the woodwork everywhere. I mean, that's nonsense. But these were the real things, with swastikas and everything, all right? They did a march in Skokie. Now, why did they choose Skokie? I'll tell you why they chose Skokie, is because Skokie had a significant number of former Holocaust survivors. Okay, not former, they were Holocaust survivors. They were former interns in German concentration camps. They survived. And they were living in Skokie. This was a long time ago. There's not many of those left, obviously. And the ACLU defended their right to march, which was entirely appropriate. If you want to march and make a fool out of yourself by being nasty to other people and hurting their feelings, you have a constitutionally protected right to do that. If you want to hurt those people physically, that's different, all right? Because there are laws that prevent that. But what we don't do is we don't say we believe in the freedom of speech, but only freedom of speech that we agree with or that we deem noble and good.
Yeah.
We don't give freedom to hate speech. That's a violation of the first freedoms. And the first freedoms are called first freedoms because they are foundational to a liberal democracy.
You're right, because if you take away somebody's sense of, or the freedom of speech, even if it is hateful, then all of a sudden you're giving them the power to define what hate is.
Well, that's the next step.
Okay.
Even if, let's just say, and it seems obvious with regards to those marchers in Skokie, that these people definitely were filled with animosity, hostility, hate, if you will, towards those Jewish people. Yeah. All right, in Skokie. And they chose Skokie for their march in order to especially hurt those Holocaust survivors. Okay, so little debate about the nature of the vice they were expressing in their march. The question, though, is what do we do about it? And the answer isn't we silence them because we don't like it. In that case, we have a clearly agreed on example of hate. All right. But if we say, if it's hate, we get to silence it, then it's those things that are called hate that get to be silenced by that logic. Now, what's hate? In our culture now, if you think that homosexuality is immoral, you are a hater by definition.
Mm-hmm.
Now, hate is not a moral, is not equivalent to a moral perspective. It is equivalent to an emotional hostility and animosity.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that you have a moral view that is accompanied by hate, but you could also have a moral view in which there's no hate involved at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a commitment to virtue.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And Christianity has been that way characteristically, even though there's been exceptions. Christianity, look at Jesus. We'll just use him as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was against immorality. He thought immorality was wrong. Okay. Even sexual immorality. Think of the woman caught in adultery in John 7 and 8. Go and sin no more. All right. She was sinning. She was caught in a sin. The witnesses to that act were gone because of Jesus' questioning. So by law, she couldn't be prosecuted. Jesus wasn't a witness, so he can't. They're not here to condemn you. I can't condemn you. I'm not a witness. But pretty clear that you were doing something wrong. Don't do that anymore. Okay? In today's cultural definition of hate, that moral assessment, that moral judgment would be considered an example of hate, when it was not an example of hate. It was an example of moral clarity. But because there are powerful groups who do not want their way of life being chastised or being moralized against, they are going to silence the voices against them by characterizing them as haters and all other kinds of things. There's a whole vocabulary that now goes along with these kinds of things, all these leftist views, like sex being assigned, That's very clever, say, oh, you were assigned this at birth. So, but this is language that makes it sound like somebody has interfered with your own personal choice. Remember the narcissism now. Remember the expressive individualism. You have interfered with my choice. This is what I should be allowed to choose for myself. This is the way it goes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So doctors should not be allowed to assign sex. Well, he's not assigning. He's just making an observation.
Yeah.
It's a boy, it's a girl kind of thing. But notice what I want your viewers to see is the manipulation of language that is characteristic under the Soviet system, and it was characteristic in the German system under the Third Reich. I have a whole book over here where a guy who survived the Third Reich as a dissident talks about all the linguistic turns that the Third Reich made the way they use language to persuade people. Mm-hmm. And this all goes back to the original citation. So you have a totalitarian way of looking at everything. It's a total system, and it looks persuasive because of the way language is being used, okay? And it makes the dissenters look immoral, outsiders who are dangerous. And so the insiders then feel completely justified in taking aggressive steps to correct the problem by silencing dissent. Silencing dissent is an earmark, it's a tell, it's an indicator of a totalitarian impulse. Christians don't want to silence dissent. You don't like Christianity? Let's hear about it. What are your reasons against it? We'll step up and may the best idea win. That's I think, the classical Christian view, even though there have been exceptions in history to the contrary. This is our view now. We don't want to silence. You know why we don't want to silence? Because we're not afraid of the debate. We're not afraid of the truth.
Yes.
When somebody has to silence the opposition with terms like the discussion is over, the science is settled. Really? How come there's so many scientists that disagree then? Oh, they're just pawns. All of this rhetoric and all this attempt to silence the opposite view is evidence that the view that is exercising the power is not strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet. And that's why they have to use power in order to stay the popular view.